Welcome to Education Matters, presented by the Public School Forum of North Carolina. I'm your host, Amos Vodchuk. Our country recently faced the longest federal government shutdown in U.S. history, as Congress was unable to pass a budget by the September 31st deadline. North Carolina continues to operate without a state budget, following the failure of the General Assembly to pass a budget by the July 31st deadline. Both of these political stalemates have meant instability for many communities, local public schools, and the students they serve. Today we're exploring how such instability can impact school nutrition and what that means for students, educators, and the local programs working to fill the gaps. Our guests are Dr. Maureen Berner, Professor of Public Administration and Government, University of North Carolina, and Melissa McDonald, Director of Services for the North Carolina Community Schools Coalition. Ladies, thank you all for joining us. Dr. Berner, I'm going to jump right in here. We've got a lot to discuss. Leading into this month, I'm sure we all heard several news stories about the 1.4 million North Carolina citizens whose SNAP benefits were set to expire November 1st. But then, of course, federal judges stepped in and ruled that emergency funds be used. Can you explain to us how SNAP, operating using those emergency funds, is different from how the program normally operates, and how long this addresses the issue?
I'd be happy to talk about what's going on right now. Normally, in the way that SNAP would normally operate, is that the federal government provides 100% of the cost of SNAP benefits, and they share about 50% of administrative costs in providing basic food to folks who've been identified as needing assistance. These benefits are issued every month in the form of a sort of a debit card, where money is allocated to the card and folks can buy food. It's been a stable, predictable program helping families get food on the table month in and month out for decades, going all the way back to the Great Depression. So this is a pretty well-established, stable, it runs pretty efficiently and effectively all the time, and it's a huge program. It's actually the amount of funding that comes for SNAP benefits for the entire program is about $250 million per month for North Carolina. That means every year, North Carolina receives and processes over $5 billion in payments to support needy families in the state. We have 1.4 million recipients of SNAP in the state, and about 580,000 of those are children. So this is a program that affects the entire state across the board. It's not very stable right now. That's the difference and that's why we're here talking about this, is that there's been a situation where there's disagreements about responsibility and payments for the program. And it's been fluctuating so much that I can't even speak to exactly what's going on at the moment. It's changing day to day. But what it's created is uncertainty about support for this program in the short term and in the long term. There are short-term impacts due to the government shutdown, and there's long-term impacts to this program based on legislation that was already passed earlier in the year.
So, Maureen, I appreciate that. That's a very holistic kind of description, and I find the numbers that you cited to be beyond significant. Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Berner. Melissa, I would love to kind of dig in with you here too from your perspective. So community schools are designed to meet students and families' holistic needs. Before the government shutdown began, how are community schools and community partners stepping in to help address food insecurity?
Yeah, one of the elements in all of our community schools is something we call a family resource center. And this is a physical space in the school that has emergency supplies for families. So that's hygiene products, clothes, and food. Many of our schools have both fresh foods, refrigerated foods, and canned good items. They are often partnered with local food banks. So, like in Vance County, the GROW, which is the Green Rural Redevelopment Organization, provides the food for the food pantries in these family resource centers. And this is similar across all of the community schools. Many of them have food partners. They're also getting donations from the people whose kids attend those schools, and the local community members to try to provide emergency support for families. One of the other elements in the Family Resource Center are computers and support to apply for benefits. So for families who are not yet enrolled in SNAP, it's an opportunity for them to apply with some support. If families aren't enrolled in WIC, there can be referrals and connections to the local health department or the entity that supports that enrollment in the community, to try to really think about what are the sort of holistic solutions. But we also recognize sometimes people are enrolled in those programs and there are just emergency situations and gaps in them that the community schools model has tried to support through these family resource centers in partnership with what the community is already doing to support families.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting kind of historic and longitudinal context. I'd ask the same question that I did to Dr. Berner, Melissa. So as the uncertainty remains around SNAP and other federal programs, are community schools able to completely fill the gap for North Carolina students and families?
I would say no. I don't think any one thing, like Maureen said, the SNAP is a huge program and it provides a lot of support. I do think this is an opportunity when community schools are able to leverage the infrastructure that they've built to kind of mobilize the surrounding community that supports the school and to make sure people know this is a crisis moment. So those who can donate more, and to work to, I mean, even when you're thinking about a situation where a food bank is getting a huge influx of more donations, right? Like the capacity to be able to get those out the door is limited. So this is a really nice opportunity for the community school to be a location that can support more people getting food in a more expedient fashion. So we're really trying to think about how to use the infrastructure as many ways as possible, and also it cannot by itself fill the gap.
Okay, so I'm seeing different threads that, when woven together, create a pretty weak tapestry of support. And I'm going to make it even more complex here, Maureen. So, how, if at all, does North Carolina's lack of a state budget factor in to the uncertainty regarding school meals for local public school students?
Well, I would focus in on a key word, and that is, I think the overall situation is just infused with uncertainty. And I think the efforts, such as what Melissa was describing, are so key to keeping us moving forward and to trying to reach as many people, as many children, as many schools as possible. But when you have uncertainty in general, you can't plan. You have a difficult time in trying to actually function as an organization because the resources may be there or they may not. You have folks that you know have traditionally needed assistance. You may have new folks who have not needed assistance before but suddenly do. So you have an entirely changing circumstance that people have to navigate to meet the change. So it really is almost in a way of, I'm sitting right now in Western North Carolina and I'm thinking about responding after a hurricane. You're not sure exactly who needs what, where, and how to mobilize those resources to meet the people who are in need. So anything that contributes to that uncertainty just makes the job harder to meet the needs of the students and the entire educational community.
Could we translate that into realities for schools in communities across North Carolina? And I'm going to invite you to answer that, Maureen, and then Melissa, invite you to join us. Walk us through some of the short and long-term consequences for schools and communities when federal supports fluctuate in the way that we've recently seen.
What this makes me think of in terms of a consequence, I'll try to give you a specific sort of example from a local school near where I live, which is a school that is bilingual, and it has a heavy population of Spanish-speaking students and families. And when you have uncertainty in terms of resources that are going to be available, it makes me think of a volunteer program that's local that provides additional food and resources to families that need it from that school on a regular basis. When you have this kind of disruptions, you don't have the ability to plan in terms of how much food can go to what people, right? And so it just, you have all the willing resources and folks, but when you have disruptions like this, the long-term consequences, short-term consequences, is that you may not have enough to serve the need, or you may be in the wrong place to serve the folks that you're trying to reach. And it creates complications that will slow down and impede the delivery of service. Yeah. That's really take that in. Folks can get through that in the short term. Long-term disruptions are much more consequential. And perhaps I can turn to Melissa in terms of if you have specific examples, I would imagine, from your resource centers and how you handle that.
Yeah, I certainly think that trying to prepare for an influx of people, right? Making sure that you have enough food and, you've kind of like the resource centers function, there are different levels of need at different times, but if something like this causes more people to be needing food, right? So trying to plan for that. I think there's community school coordinators who support those resource centers. So that's really helpful and valuable. And they can coordinate with those other local food partners. I think one thing we've been thinking a lot about as well is the kind of the downstream effects of this, right? So we can support people in providing food, and people will buy food probably if they're hungry, but that might mean they are not spending the money, they're saving the money they need to put gas in their car to get from point A to point B. It might mean that they don't have the money they need to make their rent payment. It might mean that they are not able to make a utility payment, right? And so really thinking about what are the existing local resources that can support those needs, and how will, in a month when we're kind of feeling the impact of this moment, how do we make sure that all of the community school coordinator, the family resource center is leveraging those other partners as well to try to think about, we're going to need to not only stack food resources, but also think about utility payments and rental payments.
After the break, we'll continue our exploration of the impact of political uncertainty in school cafeterias. Welcome back. Let's hop right back into our discussion of the role political uncertainty plays in shaping school nutrition. Okay, so thank you. A good portion of our conversation so far has focused on funding and the logistics of mobilizing resources. Let's talk about policy for a few minutes. And Maureen, I'll stay with you here and then invite you back into the conversation, Melissa. So, many nutrition-related policies are federally determined but locally implemented.
Yes.
How does that structure complicate or enable schools' ability to respond to hunger at the ground level?
It's a wonderful question because I think there are pluses and minuses that crisscross here, in the sense that the large programs such as SNAP, it's actually structurally controlled very heavily at the federal level. There's some wiggle room at the state level, and then there's much less so at the local school level or the local community level. On the other hand, there are other programs, specific programs that are trying to meet the needs especially of children, that are flexible and optional where local folks have choices to participate. For example, there are summer meal programs that are available that the federal government will support, but it's entirely up to the locals in terms of if they want to do it and how they would like to do it, and they're supported by schools and nonprofits and community groups and local governments, so there's a lot of flexibility there. So I think it's a complex picture broadly, Amos, when you sort of ask about that question. There is stability in some sense in having these are the rules and you have to follow the rules. There is benefit in saying we have options, but you guys have to figure it out yourself at the local level.
On the education matters, we discuss policy, we discuss the realities of adults predominantly as it relates to student learning, but this episode's focus is squarely on the needs of children. And so with this platform in mind, Melissa, as we head into the winter months, when family budgets are often tighter, what would you like policymakers or the public to understand about the connection between food security and student success?
Yeah, I think that it's so impossible to imagine children showing up at school able to focus on anything if they're not able to eat, right? I can't do that as an adult, right? I think it's children carry so much more than their backpacks, and when they are walking into school with all of that and then they haven't had anything to eat, like that's a big deal. When they're worried about, when they know that their mom isn't eating so that they can eat, like that's also a stress factor. Families are going to be more stressed without this SNAP support, and when they're spending money on food that they would normally use SNAP benefits for, and they don't have the resources they need for their utility bill as it gets cold, like that's going to be a really big problem too. So I think that the educational success, like food security and just general economic security, is an imperative for students. And the SNAP program is so impactful and important to so many students and children and families around the state. So really, I think we need to find a way to make sure that that it is continuing.
Thank you, Melissa. Maureen, last word.
I absolutely agree with Melissa that a hungry child can't learn. If that child can't learn, and that's going to affect the classroom, it's going to affect the school. And I also will piggyback on Melissa's statement about wider sense of success. This is not just about success with the children, although they're foremost in our minds, but it's with the parents. It's the ripple effect of with the parents and the community. So when you think about that in a positive way, if we can positively support the students in the classroom, and food is essential for that, then that's going to mean that the parents are successful, the teachers are successful, that ripples into community and economic development success over the long term. It really starts at the fundamental, taking care of fundamental needs is actually a community-wide bonus for us moving forward socially and economically.
Ladies, thank you so much for joining us today. After the break, this week's final word.
Before the final word, the forum team wanted to share some information about the federal government shutdown, which ended this week. Beginning October 1st and lasting 44 days, the shutdown was the longest in U.S. history. The continuing resolution signed by President Trump on Wednesday evening to end the shutdown funds most federal agencies through the end of January and reverses the mass layoffs of federal employees that occurred during the shutdown. It also extends funding for the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Agriculture, SNAP, military construction, and Congress itself through September 2026. For North Carolina SNAP recipients, partial benefits had been released for November, but the reinstatement of full funding now allows NCDHHS to resume normal disbursements. However, uncertainty remains about another critical issue: whether Congress will vote to extend the Affordable Care Act health insurance subsidies, set to expire at the end of the year. With January rapidly approaching, while this resolution does reopen the federal government, it does not fix the issues of instability. Programs that students, educators, and their families rely on hang in the balance. And for continued updates, visit ncforum.org.
On the first episode of Education Matters this school year, we discussed legislative updates from the summer. One of the biggest concerns then was how funding uncertainty brought on by the lack of a state budget and temporarily withheld federal funding would impact students. Since then, the General Assembly still has not passed a state budget, and the federal government underwent the longest shutdown in U.S. history. These political disruptions not only forced schools to operate with uncertain funding for several education programs, they also pose the risk of increasing food insecurity for students. Earlier this month, more than 1.4 million North Carolinians were set to lose their Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP benefits, as the federal government shutdown continued. Federal judges had ordered that emergency funds be used to keep the program afloat temporarily. But the reality is that those emergency funds could not replace SNAP at its full capacity. When federal supports like SNAP fluctuate, the impact reaches far beyond household budgets. It lands squarely in our local public schools. Children who arrive hungry struggle to focus, and school nutrition teams must stretch limited budgets to meet growing needs. As we saw during the shutdown, food banks, community schools, and local nonprofits are willing to step in to help fill the gaps, but they were never designed to fix such issues alone. For every 9 meals provided by SNAP, the current food bank system can only provide 1. The instability of these programs exposes a truth many of us would rather ignore. Our safety nets are fragile. In the face of such uncertainty, the ripple effects are immense. Families cannot plan, schools cannot budget, and students cannot thrive when the ground beneath them keeps shifting. Beyond the cafeteria, moments of federal or state inaction ripple through every part of our education system. Funding delays can jeopardize key grants that support early learning, special education services, teacher training, and rural broadband expansion. These same disruptions slow critical supports families and educators rely on outside of school, including housing assistance, childcare subsidies, and transportation programs. When these systems stall, the effects are felt across entire communities. For schools already operating on thin margins, even short-term interruptions can create long-term consequences for learning and well-being. Delays in Washington and Raleigh mean a guessing game for classrooms across North Carolina. Without clear funding commitments, districts are left to operate on hope and half measures, trying to meet growing needs with dwindling certainty. Teachers, bus drivers, and cafeteria workers show up every day regardless, but they deserve systems that show up for them too. Our students deserve better than temporary fixes, indefinite waiting, and uncertainty surrounding the programs their families rely on. They deserve a stable, predictable system that prioritizes their futures over political stalemates. As we enter a season defined by gratitude and giving, we call on lawmakers to provide the certainty our schools need to plan, hire, and feed every child who walks through their doors. Thank you for taking time with us to learn and think about education. That's all for today, and we'll see you next week.